Good evening, Littleton. Welcome to the November 29th, 2023 Board of Health meeting. We have a relatively full agenda this evening. Our first hearing is going to be for 26 Concord Drive, a request for a variance for a sieve analysis in lieu of a perk test under Title V. Looks like I've got, thank you, Scott, for raising your hand. The petitioner's engineer here will bring them to the panel so that they can present.
Good evening.
Good evening, Scott. Welcome.
Let me start my video. There we go. Should I just give you a rundown here quickly and move along? Do you have to read anything to?
No, as I say, so we're opening the hearing for 26 Concord Drive. If you have any plans to share, we would love to see them. You should be able to share your screen as a panelist and present what you're requesting, and we'll work from there.
All right. I will share. Let's see. Probably the best one there. Everyone see that?
We can.
Okay. So this is 26 Concord Drive. It's on the corner of Concord Drive and Worcester Road. It's a site of an existing single-family house. It's proposed to be raised. It's about a half an acre, just over half. It's 0.56 acres, so pretty good sized lot for that area of the lake. We were out earlier in the fall to do test holes, and we dug some holes across the lot, and it water table about 2.5 feet, and it had good depth of soil. It was all glacial till, sandy loam, but the water table was too high for us to actually run a perk test in it. Water table was very high this year from all the rain, so we took a sample, had a sieve analysis done, and it came back as we classified it in the field as a sandy loam, and we've requested a variance under local upgrade approval 154051 for a sieve test to be allowed to be used in lieu of perk test because of the inability to run it because of the water table for the system upgrade here. The proposed design is we utilized a Presby bed here because it helps in the size of the footprint and also the system elevation. You get a 2-foot groundwater offset with utilization of the Presby system under remedial use approval. And just the way the site grades out, the street is low, and the site kind of climbs up from Concord Drive to the rear, and the slope to the street is really too great in the front for siting of a system. It does kind of level off toward the back, but you end up with trying to site the septic system. You're kind of fighting the grade of the street with the house site location, and it really, long story short, the Presby system works really well on this site for achieving the goal of getting a system in, meeting our 10-foot limit of fill to a property line associated with the septic because of that 2-foot reduction, and just fitting it in on the lot. So we're here tonight to ask for a variance under the local upgrade approval for the sieve in lieu of variance, but I just want to write you down the design of the lot. And the proposed house is shown kind of in dark burgundy here, and the proposed septic is in kind of bright green here. I'll zoom in a bit so maybe you can see it a little better. But pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Thank you, sir. Quick question before we actually go to Jim. With Presby and the high water table, are you requesting a groundwater offset change as well?
No, we don't need it under the remedial use approval for Presby. You're allowed to utilize a 2-foot groundwater offset with the system, and that's by right. It's just that's not part of the variance request.
Okay, let's go to Jim. Jim, any feedback, questions, comments, or anything for this one before we go to the board?
Sure. So I guess DEP didn't set up that whole reduction of groundwater with the use of remedial with these innovative systems very well. Kind of nested in the language of the approvals, it says the local approving authority may grant up to a 2-foot reduction to the groundwater offset for remedial use. So I've always viewed it as something the board needs to at least approve. Again, I don't see a problem with it here on this site. Again, for the reasons that Scott mentioned, trying to get the site to work, try to minimize fill to lot lines, try to minimize, kind of grading down towards the street, and get the house to fit. It makes sense to do that 2-foot groundwater offset. It's in an area, you can see the kind of dark blue line coming out to the street. It's in an area of town water. So again, I don't see an issue with the the groundwater reduction, but we've always kind of, because of the way DEP has left the approval letters, it does state that local boards of health can approve up to a 2-foot reduction. I guess I might take a little bit of exception with the by right. It's your right to grant that if you feel it's appropriate. I think it's probably the more appropriate way to put it. So,
all right. No, thank you, Jim, and thank you for that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
Nope, that's all right. Scott, if you have something you'd like to share before we go to the board, that's fine.
No, I guess the language in the remedial use approval is it might not be crystal clear one way or the other whether variance. I guess it does say may be allowed. I'd have to go back and read it again. I've always handled these Presby upgrades with utilizing that 2-foot groundwater offset. Makes the system more attractive to utilize. So maybe I need to go back and reread that, Jim.
Yeah, no, it's, like I say, it's DEP didn't do anyone any favors with the way they wrote those documents.
And they revised them annually just to throw a word in edgewise,
but they don't tell you they do that until you go back and somebody calls you on it. So absolutely, yeah. So.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go to the board now. We're going to go by my views. We're going to start with Matt Wason.
No questions. Thank you.
Pause one moment. Another one of our board members did have to start a few minutes late, and he will be joining us in a second. There we go. Kevin Baker, are you with us? Hello, sir. Sorry about that. I had my audience button minimized in the background. I apologize for if there was a long delay. I'm not sure how much of this presentation you heard.
I heard it.
All right, great. Sorry about that. My next view is Kevin Davis. Any comments, questions?
Yeah, comment the as submitted plans that the public gets to view and what you've presented are different. The location of the tank on the as submitted plans is not the same as the location that you're presenting. So which one's correct? And then the other thing, another comment is I've been in enough of these now where we've had a 2-foot water ground. Sorry, we've used a Presby to have a 2-foot ground water offset, and that's always been asked as a variance. So I would definitely think about that.
If I may, Kevin, page 9 of the packet looks to me to be the same drawing. Is it different?
Yeah, it is. It is. So Jim had a few kind of bookkeeping comments on revising the plan, and so we did submit a revised plan last week. And prior to that, our client asked me about moving the tank because it was his preference to come out of the back of the building at that corner. So I reconfigured the sewer line exit and the tank orientation, but it was a pretty minor change. Didn't change any of the system elevations, even the tank itself. The inverts stayed the same and all that. Just tweaked the tank a little bit.
I understand. It's just a difference between what's been presented. It's part of the matter of public record and what we're actually seeing on the screen.
Yeah, so a revised plan was submitted last week to Neshoba, and that's what's being presented to you tonight. Yeah, we applied for the variance 3-4 weeks ago, at the beginning of November. So this plan just recently came off the press just the end of last week.
Jim, did you get those revised plans?
That is the plan that I have for tonight's meeting.
Is the one that he's showing,
Correct.
not the one in the packet.
Yep. Just so I did a review, and as Scott mentioned, I sent some comments over, the design comments. This plan is a result of those changes based on my comments. And it is the plan he's resubmitted for permitting.
Okay. So we just need to have that reflected in the packet afterwards. Okay. All right. I'm all good.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And we'll talk on our side, the administrative side, to make sure that we're seeing the most updated plans before they come to us, and they're included in the packet for public input as well. We recognize certainly things sometimes change last minute, but we want to try to be as transparent as we can across the board. Kevin Baker, again, you were in the audience. I apologize you weren't on the panel at the time, but it sounds like you heard the presentation. Do you have any comments or questions?
I caught the tail end of it. I was just looking at the packet though. Is the only variance the sieve analysis?
That was our only request. We did bring up that they probably need to request a groundwater offset variance. They wanted the local upgrade approval for the sieve, and they probably need a variance request for the change from the 4-foot to 2-foot groundwater offset. I do not believe they've submitted a variance request for that, but I think we could probably act on that pending them submitting it to the office.
Okay. Yeah, I have no questions. There's no wetlands?
No,
Yeah.
across the street, but
Okay.
greater than 100 feet.
Yeah, no questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baker. The chair has no questions. It looks like we have no lot line issues. So there probably was not any butter notification for this one. And I don't see any hands. If anybody in the audience who has any questions or comments about this, please raise your hands. I do see 3 members in the audience, but no hands at this point. If there's no further discussion, I will entertain a motion.
I make a motion to grant the variance for the utilization of a sieve analysis in lieu of percolation test for later design loading, and a further variance update to the plan to handle a 2-foot offset to the groundwater clearance in using Presby.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Mr. Baker,
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis votes yes.
Matt Wason.
Matt Wason, yes.
Chair votes yes. The waiver and local upgrade approval has been granted. Mr. Hayes, thank you so much for your presentation. Good luck with the project.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good night.
You apologize. I'm trying to keep up with some notes.
I thought that was the most efficient way of doing that.
Yep. No, Brenda's not here this evening, so I'm trying to keep my notes.
Yep.
All right. We are up for our 7:10 public hearing for 15 George Street. Request for a variance for local upgrade approval. The petitioner's engineer Civil Solutions, and I see Kirk. There we go. I'm promoting you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Kirk Patrick with Civil Solutions, and I'm here on behalf of Ann Rothwell for a property at 15 George Street. And be happy to share the plan here.
That would be great.
So basically what we have proposed before you is an upgrade design for the existing 3-bedroom house. Zoom in on the plan view here. The existing system failed the Title V inspection. It currently is composed of a small tank off the right rear corner of the house and then a leach field in the middle of the backyard. We went out and did some soils testing, test holes 1 and test hole 2. We had test hole 1, we had top and subsoil, and then changed to a sandy loam with an estimated seasonal high water table of 30 inches and observed at 42 inches. And test hole 2 had 42 inches of fill, and then also changed to the same sandy loam. It observed water table at 54 and estimated at 32 inches. What we're proposing to do is to come out to a new 1,500-gallon 2-compartment septic tank. It's going to flow to a 1,000-gallon pump chamber, and it's going to pump the liquid up to a system composed of the geomat. It's going to be 35 feet long and 19.6 feet wide. We picked the location in the middle of the backyard. It's fairly flat. The grade there now is about 99.3, and the yard gently slopes off to the side to the right. And then actually on the left side, there's a pretty significant drainage swale that runs from the rear of the property all the way out to the street. I think that it allows water from the street adjacent behind it to naturally flow across the ground out to George Street. So it's not, we wouldn't want to impact that and block the drainage through the neighborhood. And the front yard, the house sits probably about 5 feet above the street, so that it's sloping ground. It's served by town water with entrance on the right front corner of the house. So with that being said, because the water table is so high, we were not able to run the percolation test. So we're asking for the use of a sieve analysis where the perk test cannot be run due to groundwater interference. We're asking for a reduction in the offset to the water table from 4 feet to 2 feet with the use of the geomat leaching system. And we're asking for local upgrade approval for less than 12-inch separation between the inlets and outlets of the septic tank and high groundwater. It's about 10 inches to the inverts on the septic tank and about 6 inches to the inverts on the pump chamber. And I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jim, if you have any feedback for this before we go to the board.
Sure. So this is a tough neighborhood, as Kurt described, the water table issues. And we've replaced, I think this is the last one kind of in a string of them that we've replaced. And before we had the geomat, which is just kind of a new type of innovative system that lowers the profile of the system. The systems get to be pretty high in the backyards. And when you're working with established foundations, you're always worried about drainage running back into the house. So in addition to the 2-foot offset, one of the things the geomat allows is if you pressure dose it, it minimizes what they call the breakout fill, the horizontal fill you need to keep the effluent from breaking out on the side slopes. Because you're spreading the effluent equally over this entire mat with the dosing system, you get better treatment because you're getting intermittent dose over the whole area, but you also get to pull back that breakout requirement. So it gives you a smaller footprint and kind of minimizes and helps you work with the sites as far as surface drainage. The area is town water. It seems a reasonable fit for the site.
All right. Thank you. We're going to go to the board. We'll start with Kevin Baker.
I have no questions.
All right. Kevin Davis.
Look at that, an engineer that asked for the correct offset. Isn't that amazing? Okay. The only question I have, it's a sealed tank, is that what it is? Because I know you got the fewer boot, is it sealed tank? And
Yeah,
boot,
so
is that what it is?
So,
Okay.
so both
Okay.
the septic tank and the pump chamber are going to be monolithic, so the seams at the top of the wall, so it's basically a bathtub with a flat top.
Yeah.
And they're both going to have H20 loading, the heavy covers. And
Okay.
they're both be ordered with the precast rubber boots, and the risers to be sealed to the tops of the tanks.
Perfect. Okay. That was my only question. Thank you.
All right. Matt Wason.
No further questions. Thank you.
And no questions from the chair. We do have, again, 3 members in the audience. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns regarding 15 George, please raise your hands. Seeing nothing from our audience, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to grant to allow the reduction of the requisite groundwater offset from 4 feet to 2 feet with the use of a geomat leaching system, to grant the use of a sieve analysis instead sieve analysis, and to also grant the 12-inch separation between the inlets and the outlets of the tanks and the high groundwater.
I have a
I'll
motion.
second.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Kevin Baker. Roll call vote. Kevin Baker,
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Kevin Davis,
Kevin Davis votes yes.
Matt Wason,
Matt Wason, yes.
and the chair votes yes. Waivers are granted for 15 George for sieve analysis, a change in the groundwater offset, and a less than 12-foot offset for the tank inlet and outlet. Thank you so much. Good luck with the project, sir.
Great, thank you. Have a good night.
Good
You
night.
as well. All right, our next public hearing is for 4 Foss Place. A discussion regarding an existing on-site well from a potable water to an irrigation well transition for a dwelling which has been replaced and is now attached to town water. Do I have anyone in the audience for Foss Place? There we go. Thank you, ma'am, for raising your hand. I'm going to promote you. You should see a box popping up in a moment to ask you to be a panelist.
There we go. Sorry. Hi.
Nope, that's okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Health.
Thank you. I hoped we'd be joined by both the builder who's having trouble getting into the webinar. He's tried clicking on it. He's going to try switching over to his phone, and the buyer. I'm not sure where the buyer is of the house, but I can start. Certainly, I'm familiar with it.
Great, that'd be wonderful.
The house was originally served, the original house that was there was served by a well. And it was a relatively new well, and the buyer hoped to hold on to it to be able to use it for future irrigation purposes. And that was the goal from when we started. And that's something that we've done in the past in Littleton, is when a house is switched over to a public water source, the existing well is saved for irrigation purposes, and the buyer understands they have to pull a permit and can keep the system totally separate in order to do that. The buyer in this case would like to. Mr. Griffey wants to make sure, has told me he prefers that the board know that this well exists and wants to make sure that you folks, it's on your radar, I believe.
All right, thank you. As I know, we've certainly seen a little bit about this over time, and I'm going to ask Jim to kind of give us a summary if you don't mind, and then we'll add in anything else that we may have been aware of, and we'll come hear from the board. So, Jim, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit kind of the backstory here of how this one got before us.
Sure. So I guess it's timely in that you're reviewing well regulations at this point. So it's a good subject matter to take a look at. There are existing wells here or there in town. Sometimes people like to keep those wells for irrigation purposes. The concern I have with wells when a property is tied into town water is you're left with a hole in the ground. In the case of a shallow well, it's in the groundwater, so the water right underneath. So shallow well, stone lined or well tiles, that to me presents both a hazard to contaminate the groundwater and a hazard for somebody to fall into it. And so that's one of the reasons I like to see those shallow wells particularly sealed up. In the case of a drilled well, now you have a casing, it's drilled into the bedrock, and now you have a casing that's kind of set into the bedrock. Again, the opportunity, not so much for somebody to fall into it because the casing's only 6 inches in diameter, but the opportunity for it to become contaminated and then contaminate the bedrock water. And so making sure if they're going to be used for irrigation that they're left in a condition where you're not going to get groundwater or any other potential contamination to that well while they're working on trying to possibly turn it into a irrigation system. I guess a third concern I have in this case here, it's a tight site and the well is very close to the edge of the driveway and the road. And there's some rocks there protecting the casing. But again, it's one of those things where somebody backs into it. Now you've jarred the casing from the bedrock, whatever seal may be between the bedrock and that casing, may be dislodged. Again, it's one of these things. The area is town water, so would it affect anybody immediately? Probably not. But again, there are holes into the bedrock, and that bedrock has water that gets used at some point in time by people in town. So, the proper and careful kind of consideration of how you address those. If they decide to turn it into an irrigation well, one of the things that will be important is to make sure that the system for the irrigation water is separate from the domestic water in the house, so they don't have a cross connection between the two water systems. So again, these are concerns. And, if it was being done, if the system was being installed at this point, we could then go in and take a look at it and make sure that the systems are separate. Was it kind of just sealed off and maybe being used? We kind of rely on the homeowners letting us know. There's no permit required for the installation of an irrigation system. So they'll just have to let us know, I guess.
Sir,
Yes, Crowley.
the buyer says he's online and was hoping to be able to speak. Sean Dolan?
Yeah, one moment, Mr. Dolan. I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Again, you should see a little box pop up asking you to accept the promotion to panelist.
Good evening. Sorry, I kind of lost my voice here, but
Nope, that's okay. Good evening. Welcome to Board of Health.
yeah. So I guess my only thing I would add is just that we know it's been decommissioned, and we don't have any plans to use it for irrigation. But of course, if we ever decided to use it for irrigation, we would contact you guys first.
Do you mean you don't have any immediate plans?
I mean, we don't have any immediate plans for use of it.
Right, at this time. The concern about it being connected still to the house and there being a potential cross-contamination between the well and the public water source. The existing house that was there was completely removed, was located in a slightly different place and was certainly a different size and a different configuration. There is no hole in the foundation going between this well and the new house. There is no way to get the water from this well over to the new house without drilling a hole in the foundation and digging a big trench and doing major work. And the buyers are very aware that it can't be connected to back to their house.
Mr. Chair, just so you know, I did get a letter from a well company stating they put a cap on the well. Where the pitless adapter goes in, they've plugged that up. That pitless adapter hole is on the side of the casing, and that would be where they'd have to put a new pitless in and hang a pump if they want to use it for. So it's sealed, but not. I wouldn't say decommissioned. It's at this point kind of been abandoned. To me, decommissioned means it's full of bentonite clay and can't be used anymore. But that's how we've taken to mean decommissioning. So.
Oh, and
Okay.
Mr. Gallagher, the current owner of Builder, is on the call also and was hoping to be recognized.
One moment.
Thank you.
So while he's coming up, so let's go through. So I know the original plan was that it sounded like it was proposed for the septic system for the new construction included the well being decommissioned. Then there was some discussion about not decommissioning it. And at this point, it sounds like from Mr. Gurefi that the well is not truly decommissioned. It is merely basically capped.
In the past, decommissioning it has been removing the pump and the pillars and capping it with a safety cap. That was considered decommissioning it. On the house on Barron Way, for example, I ended up taking a picture of it down in the ground for Mr. Griffey, so he could see that it had been done properly before they backfilled over it. But they immediately used it for irrigation. Within 6 months, they had it back and were using it for irrigation. And that's on 5 Barron Way. And that's what Mr. Gallagher thought was decommissioning, quite frankly, was to cap it, take the pump out, take all the parts out, make sure it was safely done by a Skillings did it by a well company, and make sure it was done properly. That's what he thought needed to be done. And so, but things change, of course.
Yeah, the well on Barron Way is much bigger. This one here, again, the well is right on the edge of the traveled way and on the edge of the driveway. So again, additional concern, just where it is.
But the road is a private dead end road that cannot be accessed by the public. It is a paper road. Mr. Gallagher went through this whole thing with the Light and Water Department. Whereas if it was a public way and could ever be expanded into being a road, for example, if the Yap land behind this house were ever to be developed, could this become a public road and public way? And the answer after a title search was no. This is a private way. You can never have more than 3 houses off of it. Indeed, there are only 3 properties accessing it. And even the third property has appropriate access from Ipswich. This is really a driveway situation. A town does not maintain it. The town does not own it. The town does not, has never ever been deeded what's it called? I don't know what it's called. Deeded the right to, when they given fee. Is that right, Kevin? I don't remember. Do you remember?
Say right away.
It's the town has never been granted any fee to it. I think that's the legal term where the town has a right to use it for anything. Anyway.
Does the town plow it?
No.
Okay, because that would be my concern in all of this is that if the plow comes down the street and those rocks slide, town plows a little bigger, they hit that casing, that would be a concern.
Town does not plow it.
Okay.
Town does not maintain it. The town currently will maintain a private road if there are a minimum of 3 houses on it and you petition the town and you bring it up to town standards. This only has 2 houses on it. Well, the other property, I said there's another property that abuts it, but it also abuts Ipswich, so it would come off Ipswich. So the town is never going to plow this according to the town rules, current town rules. I mean, I can't guarantee you that something won't happen in the future, but that's pretty unlikely for the town to take over plowing on a road for one person, basically.
Mr. Baker, go ahead.
Since this has been done many times in the past in Littleton, what's the proper course of action to actually get it approved officially or not?
So your regulations are kind of silent on it. So you're talking about kind of updating your regulations. This is an opportunity where this is a situation that, depending on the community, some of them require that there's a notice on the deed so that people know it's not a potable water supply. Some may require it filled in because they're too close to roads. I guess this discussion is more for your board to kind of say, what do we want to do with these wells? How do we want to handle these things? This is only the second one that I'm aware of in town that we've addressed.
I think the notice on the deed is kind of like the best we can do.
Yeah, at this point, your rules don't even talk about that. But again, because you're discussing, revising your regulations, felt it was a good opportunity to have this discussion about this well.
Okay.
Hold on, Mr. Crowley, one moment. Mr. Davis, go ahead.
Yeah. So when I first moved up here to Massachusetts, I'm going to tell a little story because I can. When I first moved up here to Massachusetts, I lived in the town of Wilmington, and Wilmington had a whole bunch of paper streets where we bought our first house. And paper streets are lovely things that the land court has decided that as long as it's a paper street, It exists as a potential street that can become something, right? But until, like the attorney mentioned there, until you have 3 homes next to it, it really can't become much of it. So they own to the center fee, which is that center line of the road backwards. And that's what they can consider. However, from a safety perspective and things like that, the town's never going to come in and plow it. The town's, because it only has gone for a subdivision board. It's just on a subdivision plot line that it exists as a paper street. So there would have to be a whole bunch of rules that the town would have to go do. However, if both sides are owned by an individual or developer to go do that, they could very well turn that into a road without issue because it exists as a paper street. So I understand Mr. Gareffi's part about wanting to protect that piece, and I can actually go pull up I got a law book sitting on a shelf somewhere that actually I have marked from when I was dealing with a developer in Wilmington about paper streets. So, yeah. So I understand his concern. I think listening to more about what our well stuff is, I appreciate that. And it sounds like the only thing we can do is put on some sort of deed restriction. Sounds like that was the only other time. Was that the only thing that was done with the Barrett Way?
We didn't
Nothing
even
was
do
done
that.
with the other one. Yep.
Because it was in the middle of the backyard or something like that.
Much bigger lot.
It was far enough away from any streets or anything like that.
It was.
So this one is right in the front corner of Fawson. Is Ipswich? Is that what's going on?
No,
No.
it's so when you turn onto the driveway, it's right there. I mean, so the driveway's kind of comes up the half of the street that they would own
Yeah.
to, I guess, and
Yeah.
then turns into the lot, and the well's
Yeah.
right there. There's a couple of rocks protecting the casing at this point. So, like I say, your regs are silent to it, if you will, and so
Yeah.
that's why on Barron there wasn't anything done. But where you're talking about revising your regs, again, I wanted to be able to use it to kind of spark
Got
a
it.
conversation about.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Before we continue the board, I just want to clarify. So it sounds like Mr. Greffy's concern isn't necessarily about the street, whether it's a accepted town way versus a paper street driveway. It sounds like the concern is more that it is very close to a drivable route. There's cars, vehicles moving in and out of that route, and it's relatively close. It is where it is for the existing house, but that its location is at higher risk than other locations would be of having a vehicle accidentally hit it, impact it, damage the casing, potentially contaminate the bedrock water. It sounds like that's more your concern rather than, yes, a town plow being bigger than a pickup truck plow, potentially hitting it, but really its location near a navigable way, near a place where cars, trucks, fire trucks, whatever can coming in and out. It sounds like that's more the concern with wanting to make sure it is safely either managed, secured, protected, or decommissioned. Isn't whether it's a paper way or not, but really it's just near a place where vehicles travel, and that it is very, very close. Is that
just
kind of more the gist?
Yeah, and just so I can make sure it's a clear picture of this, this is the dead end street at this point, and this is the last house on the street. So the only traffic that would be going by it, probably the traffic for the house. So that's why I asked the question about plowing it. If it's not going to be plowed by the town, the homeowners are aware of its location, and with rocks or whatever in place, you know, the rocks may do more damage to the vehicle if they hit the rocks than to the well.
Are the rocks pretty good size?
They're good size. There'd be enough, you know, unless you had unless you had a big high vehicle, they're going to do some damage.
Mr. Chair.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Hold on. So, Matt, I'm going to have you hold on for 1 second, okay?
Sure.
Mark Gallagher, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for recognizing me. It was alluded to earlier in the conversation that we had after our attorney had done the title work, and we hired a specialist about the road because we had some questions with Littleton Power and Light, both for accessing the power and the water, because we wanted to bring town water up. Jim mentioned earlier that the well that's existing was within 100 feet of the old septic system. So for us to move from raising the previous house and putting a new one in, we acquired water that was on Ipswich. In acquiring that, the Littleton Power and Light was concerned about the private way as well. And we went through the legal recourse of determining that the fee in the road had never been taken by the town of Littleton. And as Cheryl has explained, what would be the cost? The current the buyer, or us as the owner, we own across the top of this dead end. So there was some concern and conjecture that the adjacent parcel, the large farm fields that are adjacent to us, could be developed at some point in time, and the road could become a public way. In fact, we proved to Littleton Power and Light, and we provided this to the town, that cannot be the case unless the buyer or the owner of the property would acquiesce to that. So that we kind of eliminated the concern that this was going to become a thoroughfare. One of the other things that we did is we recorded an agreement with Littleton Power and Light that the future owner would have responsibility, like a deed restriction, for any maintenance and repairs of the water line, because they were concerned that somebody may damage the water line, and then they would have to come up and excavate the road and find the water. Two things that I would suggest to try to put this to bed. In terms of the rocks, I would suggest that in order to maintain or keep the well in its existing location as it's capped and somewhat decommissioned, that we would put a couple of ballards in, put a couple of lally columns in the ground, concrete filled, maybe around 2 or 3 sides of the well. That would, surely stop somebody from being able to back into it, move a rock, or, they would do damage to their car well before they'd get to the well. The second thing is we could put a similar agreement on record. I just don't know who the agreement would be with, since there is no current rules and regulations to rely upon for the well, and we're talking about, future rules and regulations. Who would be the signatory authority to sign on behalf of the town to allow the well to stay there? If there are no rules and regulations, then there's no signatory authority. So really, we could put a deed restriction voluntarily on for you. But I mean, if we wanted to have an agreement like we do with Littleton Power and Light, we would have to have a rule and regulation in order to be able to rely upon. And it sounds like Jim wanted to bring this forward to instigate a conversation and obviously direction for everyone in town about future when this comes up again. However, there's nothing really in place for us to have an agreement with, an entity in the town of Littleton.
Thank you, sir. Matt, before I go to you, I just have one quick question for Jim. You had said this is with our current regs, the 1980s, 90s current version of regs, this well, if drilled today, would not be in compliance because it's too close to the leaching field?
Sure, that's right. So when the kind of the history of it, Ms. Crowley had mentioned to me that she had some well information, so I went looking in our file. The only thing I can really find is this well was put in back in 1975. There's an old tiny little permit slip from a Littleton Board of Health back then. And at the time, there was an old cesspool put in the back. The house was served by a cesspool that was in the backyard. Back in I think it was the 90s, they upgraded the house, the septic system for the house, I should say. And I think that system, I believe, was within 100 feet of the well. So for the new construction, they needed to address that and put town water in there.
They actually drilled a new well when they upgraded the septic system. I have seen paperwork for it. It was done by Skillings. I don't know why it's missing from the town folder now. I certainly didn't take it, but I have seen the paperwork for it. And the previous owner of the house confirmed it with me that they had, in the 1990s, when they replaced the septic system with a 1-bedroom septic system, they also replaced the well and got it as far away from the septic system as they could. and still remain on their property. It was as it does not meet current regulations, certainly for drinking water, and this could never be used for drinking water. But I don't believe irrigation wells have the same requirement as drinking water wells, do they?
They do not in Title V.
Right. So it doesn't need to be 100 feet away from a septic system if it's for irrigation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this isn't, but there.
All right, Matt, you've been very, very patient. I'm sorry. Matt Wasting, go ahead.
Jim, what are our current regulations on decommissioning a well?
I'd have to go back and look. Typically, we follow kind of the standard. What ends up happening is we tell a well driller, provide us with how you're going to decommission it. So there's some factors that come into play. Bentonite clay, from what I'm told from well drillers, they can drop the chips down the well if the well's 200 feet or less. So when they have deeper wells, a lot of times they'll put pea stone down, or they'll put a plug down the well and then fill above it. Then they'll cut the casing off, weld a cap on it. Again, the clay swells, can't get any water into it.
But specifically for our regulations, does it say the Board of Health is responsible for approving whatever the decommissioning process is, or
for issuing permits? I'd have to look and see if it talks about decommissioning, but typically any kind of permit, and in most towns, most regulations, decommissioning is something that you get a permit for. And,
Okay.
and it needs to be done, unless it's a big shallow well, it needs to be done by a well driller.
so in my opinion, I'm not worried about the road. That's not really a thought for me, because I don't think it matters necessarily where the well is. I think there should be something noted on the deed that the well exists and is decommissioned, simply because it can always be a future access point to the groundwater and to the water table. And so I think it behooves the Board of Health and the community very much to make sure that's a permanent thing on the record, so that even if the top is buried under plant growth and something like that, all future owners know that that access point exists. So I would support some sort of permanent record, like a deed restriction, to call that out. The other piece is that in the absence of something more specific, Massachusetts DEP says that the sealing procedure for a well is to seal it with some quantity of material inside the well, not just a cap on top. So I would say that as a Board of Health member, that is what I would follow as a recommendation, to say it's not decommissioned until it is sealed, so that we're again protecting that access point to the water.
Right. Can I just ask a question?
Go ahead, Mr. Gallagher.
If the future owner is allowed to drill a well for the purposes of irrigation, and this is an existing well, and we place some kind of deed restriction on the deed, I don't know what form that would be, but I can ask my attorney. Why would we then fill the well with some kind of material that would prevent them from ever being able to use it in the future? If they could apply tomorrow to drill a well for irrigation, which I live in town, and I looked into this because I wanted to run my irrigation system. And I was told that I could, hire Skillings, drill a well, sign an agreement that it was not for potable water. Why, I guess, can't this well remain with the cap having been placed on it, and all of the pump and all of the attachments from the well to the house have been removed? Why can't it sit there for future use if there's some kind of a note placed on the deed? I'm failing to understand.
If I could, I would say that you're falling between the gray area of a decommissioned well and an active well. I think if you activated it today as an irrigation well and it would be an active well, then we wouldn't have concerns about contaminants getting into that shaft, right?
No, you're sure.
If it were properly decommissioned and sealed, we would not have concerns about contaminants getting in that shaft. But if we try to say it's in this nebulous middle ground, then I don't know what it is. It's not properly decommissioned, and it's not active and permitted for use.
What is the process for? What is the process for applying for it to be a irrigation well?
So what would happen is, and people do from time to time, a well driller applies for a permit. We make sure that it's the proper offsets based on Title V. for the location of that well. It's drilled. The driller files record with Mass DEP, because the town doesn't have, your board doesn't have any regulations otherwise guarantee,
But it's an
regulating.
existing, is there a rule, Jim, for an existing well? I'm sure we're not the only ones. We did this on Barron's Way.
That's the only other one
I
know
understand,
of.
I understand the adversity, but
Yeah.
They merely came, there was an existing well.
Yep.
They came into the town, they filled out some paperwork, I was told, and then Skillings came out, put in a new pump and activated it as an irrigation well.
Again, if there's a well there, it's not likely that a permit was pulled for it because they've got a well that people would look at it more like, if you have a well in your house and your pump burns out, the well company can come and replace the pump. It's one of those things that's encouraged to do because people need water in the house. So it's not necessarily an action that needs a permit.
So tomorrow I want this well to be an irrigation well. That seems to solve all the problems that we're not in a gray area. I'm willing to put a deed restriction on, but it seems to me that that's an asset that the future owner would like to use at some point in time. I'm offering to put whatever kind of protection around the well is agreed upon tonight. This buyer wants to move in. And the hiccup here is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're not willing to sign off on this until we came in front of the board tonight. So we've got a house that's completed that I thought I did the right thing when I called Skillings.
Mhm.
I thought I did the right thing. I told them they wanted to use it in the future as an irrigation well. I had them come in, paid them, gave you a copy of the receipt. I just want to close on the house. The Sean and his lovely wife want to move in tomorrow. So we just want you to sign off. I'm willing to do whatever is necessary, although I will say, I believe the precedent was previously set by the prior owners on Barron's Way when they immediately moved to putting in an irrigation, to making the well irrigation. There was no discussion about decommissioning it, filling it with material. They just said, we want it as an irrigation well. And within 6 months, that's what they did. And it just seems logical to me that why would we cut the casing off, fill it with whatever the clay or pea stone or whatever. There's no harm, no foul with this. I mean, if there's a restriction on the deed, I don't know what the form of that would be, but we just want to close. This guy wants to move in. He's got a small family with kids in the Littleton schools. He just wants to move into his house. And I never realized this was going to be an impediment. So how do we solve the problem? Do I go in tomorrow morning? Is there paperwork to fill out? A check to be written? I just call Skillings and say I want this to be an irrigation well after they move in next spring so they can use it to water their lawn. Does that solve the problem? Because it sounds to me like, we started with, you wanted to use this as an example. I understand. You want a solution. I do too. I'm offering solutions, but I don't see why this well needs to be filled. It's kind of befuddling to me.
We're going to finish working through the boards for any questions, comments, concerns. Kevin Baker.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest, easiest, quickest, most efficient route is to just put a deed restriction on the property, calling out that the well is there and that it exists as an irrigation well and is not for potable use inside the house. I do agree with Mr. Gallagher that if he wants to go in and pull the permit to make it a irrigation well tomorrow, then at least we can call it an irrigation well at that point. And that should solve the problem as well. So I guess it's whatever's the path of least resistance for him.
Thank you.
All right. And the chair, Mr. and Mrs. Dolan, thank you for your patience on this. This kind of came before us originally that the Title V proposal for the new property included decommissioning the well, which from DEP has a definition. Decommissioned is, it's not simply pulled and capped, it is filled and cut, and it is no longer an access port to groundwater or bedrock water. and that's kind of thinking how it came to us before the board of that original plan of new system, new house, decommissioning, then transitioned. Well, we're not going to really decommission it. We want to use it in the future. I will say that makes perfect sense. It exists. Filling it and redrilling a new well, again, I agree, as long as it has the appropriate offsets. I'm with you. I get it. But weirder than that piece of the Title V as proposed did not match what was actually happening on site. So Jim was doing his job of what was proposed and what was on site was inconsistent, and therefore it came up before the board. So that's kind of how we got here and what created this delay. So now we're trying to find a solution of how can we move forward. So I'm as far as Matt Wason's comment of the decommissioning does in fact have a definition, and we are in this gray zone in between it. And how can we move forward? Again, the state regs have some definitions, but this in between what happened to change it from potable to irrigation aren't clear, and we don't currently have the language here in town. I agree. I'd like to be able to move forward for this family. I think it's reasonable. I think from Mr. Baker's suggestion of putting a deed restriction on it, that a well exists, that at some point they say it was potable, it's good water. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but that history of it used to be the water supply for the house, that we're just very, very clear that for the current owners who are well aware, and any future owners that would not meet the requirements for potable water by current regs, never mind anything in the future regs. It is too close to leaching field, but that for irrigation, it would be acceptable. I think that would probably be a reasonable accommodation to solve this, save money for a new well at some point in the future, and agree that, if you can flip the switch and make sure it is appropriately secured, safe from traffic and vehicles, fire trucks and Amazon or anyone else driving down that driveway, including the property owners, or in a young family, someone's gonna be driving soon eventually, and you never know what can get a hit. As long as the casing is secure and safe, that it is appropriately connected to do its job. Again, from my perspective as a member, it seems pretty reasonable. And I'm just, again, with Mr. Baker, I'm not sure the best way of accomplishing this to make the paperwork match what our intent is. From Jim, it sounds like, if a voluntary deed restriction, just acknowledging that it is there, it exists, and that it is only for irrigation. And we already know from the site, it is no longer connected in any way to the dwelling. It is outside only. There is no connection. There's no anything else that would take an active action to change that. I don't know. So any thoughts? I mean, I think where we are, Mr. Baker.
Jim, do any of the other towns that you service have paperwork in place or a template that we can utilize regarding an irrigation well?
The town of Lunenburg has some really simple language that gets inserted in the deed.
Yeah.
So, and it essentially, what it does is essentially states, as the chair mentioned, that it's not for potable use, and it generally identifies a location. Like in this case, you have a septic plan, so you can say the well located on such and such a plan is only for irrigation purposes only, not for that kind of. So I can certainly dig it up after the meeting here and send it off.
Yeah, and if Mr. Geller wants to put it in front of his attorney, and if Ms. Geller wants to take a look at it, and maybe we can all just meet in the middle on that one and get it recorded, and these folks can just move on, and we can call it a day. And then we'll take this all into consideration as we're drafting our regs. So thanks for bringing it to the top of mind.
So what is the pleasure of the board to resolve the case before us?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the irrigation well with a deed restriction, as noted by Mr. Gariffi. The paperwork that Lunenburg has, we'll take a look at that as long as Mr. Gariffi approves it.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor for a
Clarifying question there, Kevin. You're saying your motion is saying it is going to be converted now to an irrigation well with our approval and post on deed restriction?
Correct.
Ms. Crowley or Cowley, you're on mute if you were trying to say something.
you don't want him to put on a pump and he hasn't got a yard yet. So,
Right.
No, none of the workings, just the label of what it is. It's an irrigation
Oh,
well.
you don't want him to actually try to
Just
turn it into an irrigation well right now.
to
No,
let
they're
it be
talking
known,
about
it is
putting it-
not, it is not potable water. It's not to be
Right.
connected to the house. It is solely for irrigation purposes.
Thank you.
So the deed will be noticed, if I understand correctly.
Correct. And
And
Jim, you'll send us that paperwork, Jim?
Yeah,
Or the-
I'll like I say, when we're done with the meeting tonight, I'll email.
Okay. And I'll have our attorney put together the deed restriction and you'll be the one that reviews it to approve it to be used.
Yeah, it's fairly simple language, and
Sure.
in most cases, what they do is they insert it into the deed
We
so
will
that
do
it goes with the deed. That way,
Okay.
there's no question.
Okay, we'll take care of it.
Okay, we have
so
a motion.
I know we have a motion on the floor. I was
Nope, that's
hoping
fine.
to debate just for a couple of seconds before we get a second, sir, if is that allowed, sir?
We can debate before or after a second. That either is fine.
We can go all night.
Hope not. Just as and so I need to understand, because this is going tying into what Mr. Wason was saying. I'm sorry, Dr. Wason was saying is that that we're protecting the casing which is or whatever that's going down into the water table, right? Since this is a drilled well, and I'm assuming it's a drilled well, is that correct?
Yes.
So it's got casing and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we for an irrigation well, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Okay, I'm good. I'm thinking out loud and trying to get through it. I apologize. I'm just trying to make sure that we still have like a casing on it, that it's there appropriately, that we're not going to get an influx of water into this from the surface down into the well, because then that's really bad and all that other kind of good stuff.
Based on its condition now, I don't believe that's the case. I think it's fine.
Okay. All right. Okay.
To follow up, it sounds like your concern still continues that in some ways, while we've now labeled it an irrigation well,
Yep.
it is still a bit of that gray zone, that it is not being utilized, it is not equipped, it is still basically just a pipe in the ground with a cap on it. So that, is it truly an irrigation well? No, it's a hole in the ground with a cap on it. But there is an intention in a reasonable time frame, not at some random time in the future, 5, 10, 20 years from now, we're going to connect to it. But there is, in fact, a plan that in the foreseeable future, it is going to be converted to an active irrigation well, just not now where there's still construction and no lawn. And it's November. So we are still kind of a bit of that. Is it decommissioned or is it a well? At the moment, it's a hole in the ground. It really isn't either of those things.
Right.
But the intention is, the active intention is that it will be as soon as situations literally on the ground allow, it will be flipped back to a pump and a system and all that great stuff for an irrigation system. So it will return to a well in the foreseeable future. I don't think we need to put a timeline on that for this. I think we're being pretty clear with this process. It is not in the decommissioned compliant with Title V, but I don't think we need, I think we're going to let that go as the Title V is, I mean, we're going to, so do we need to include a language, because the Title V proposed was having this well decommissioned? Do we need to make sure, because that was what Jim brought this before us, because it did not match what they asked for. Is this deed restriction, they still have not met the plan of decommissioning this well on Title V. How do we cover that to make sure that the Title V proposed is okayed?
I guess my recommendation to the board would be, with the notice on the deed and protection of the well and the invoice from Skilling showing how they've, if you're okay with that, then that would be fine with me. That was a condition I put on the permit because it was on the plan. So,
All right. So I just want to make sure, and I apologize to Ms. Cowley and the Dolans and Mr. Gallagher. We just want to make sure that, I know it's been a while, but we want to make sure we cover all these pieces of, this all started with the plan did match the ground, that we in fact addressed that signature requirement before we get to the rest. So if Jim is good, I think I personally good. We'll see what the board says. If they're okay with this covers that change in the plan for Title V and the septic system plan, and we'll be in a good place. So we have a motion for a deed restriction identifying this is a irrigation well only and its location and all that good stuff. And where can I also, if you don't mind, can I add this having the deed restriction will be an acceptable modification to the septic system plan for for the well not being decommissioned, just so we're clear. Does that make sense? Are you okay with Kevin Baker with that? Just make sure that we're covering it all. Awesome. All right, Mr. Wasson, Dr. Wason, sorry.
One question. When was the last time this well was actually in use?
We bought the property about a year ago. When we bought the property, the well was in active use. And we raised the building in the last probably 6 months ago. So at that point, when we raised the building, we removed the wires and the pipes going to the previous building. And then within the last 4 to 6 weeks, we had Skillings come in and remove the pump and do the rest of the work up to full decommissioning, but without filling it.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any discussion before we vote? Seeing none. Roll call vote. Kevin Baker.
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Kevin Davis.
Kevin Davis votes yes.
Matt Wason.
Matt Wason, no.
And chair votes yes. So, Jim, you should be all set. Jim, you're going to be our agent on this for the paperwork. If there is a question, concern, issue, Jim can bring it back before us if needed. So, but obviously we are trusting Jim for this, but obviously his judgment as well. If there's an issue, to bring it back before us.
Yep.
Ms. Cowley.
Jim, would you give me a quick call in the morning so I can facilitate this along? I'm worried about them losing their rate lock.
Sure.
As you all know, the rates have been going up lately, and I'm another rate lock's going to be in the thousands for them. So I need to make sure things move along at this point.
So I will email both you and Mr. Gallagher the language tonight.
That would be perfect. Thank you very much. And I'll make sure it gets back to you before noon tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, typically what I like to see is the draft deed with the language in it. That's going to go to closing.
Okay, I can arrange that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
And thank you for your time and efforts, board. I understand it takes a lot of evenings out. ZBA hasn't been meeting as much as we used to, but we still meet. And we meet in person though. Why aren't you guys still meeting over Zoom?
As I do business travel, and sometimes when I'm on business travel, I'm calling in from different places in the country. So having it on a Zoom meeting is very beneficial.
It is certainly convenient and completely off topic, but really it is town space and LCTV availability. That is our biggest still challenge for us. That's why we're still Zoom is meeting space and LCTV.
It's also considered more accessible
technology.
to more community members.
And it is certainly much more accessible. So I have no problem. I would love to see everybody's happy, smiling faces in person, but I definitely agree with Mr. Wason that this is, from a community perspective, it is much easier to chime in, come to a hearing when you've got small kids at home than it is showing up at town hall for 5 hours waiting for the hearing to show up. So I completely agree that I like Zoom in that piece. I miss seeing everybody's pretty faces, but I agree that it's definitely more accessible. And so, but that is why we're still on Zoom.
The ZBA found that going back in person actually made our meetings much shorter, for what that's worth. Anyways, thank you very much for your time and consideration. I appreciate it. Good
All
evening.
right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you all. Appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you very much, board members.
All right, we are obviously a little bit off of our schedule. Our next hearing is the public hearing for 23 to 31 Stevens Street, requesting a Title V waiver and a discussion of a shared system agreement for that address.
So if I could, Mr. Chair.
Of course.
I received a phone call from the attorneys beginning of the week. They want to try to meet. We're meeting Friday. I'm not sure where we left this off. Not only do they need a Title V waiver for that site, they also, because the properties are going to be owned separately that are connected to that, they need a shared system agreement. And so I think they're trying to figure out how to do all that language. So I'm not sure they're ready to come to you because both of those need your approval. And so I don't think, I talked to the attorney, I said, if you're not ready yet, I don't think it's appropriate to come to the meeting, but I left it on the agenda in case they wanted to. So if I don't see them in the audience, I would be safe to say that it's probably they're not coming. And I'm going to meet them Friday morning to try to hammer out what they need to.
All right. No, thank you very much for that. I know that they didn't realize initially that they were going to need that shared agreement between through the property. So that was, from our last hearing, probably a month ago. So I would say the chair will entertain a motion to continue the public hearing.
Good.
So moved.
This is still an active case. All right. So I
Second.
have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Kevin Baker,
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Kevin Davis,
Yes.
Matt Wason,
Matt Wason, yes.
and the chair votes yes. Continue the public hearing for 23 to 31 Stevens Street. All right. We are at our 7:40 public hearing, continuing our discussion, excuse me, not a public hearing, I apologize, continuing our discussion regarding model Board of Health regulations or new proposed regulations for private wells based on the DEP model regs.
May I?
Of course, Mr. Baker.
First off, I am going to make a motion to continue this shortly, but I wanted to explain why, first off. I haven't yet seen the markup that Mr. Chobak, was it Chris? He lives on Mattawanakee. He said he had sent a markup of the well regs to Brenda. I'm very, very curious about the language that he included in that because he seems to have some in-depth knowledge and a well. And, a really good perspective.
That's right, vested interest.
Yeah, how he thinks this should go. I'm also halfway through Mr. Gerbig's novel, and I think that he raises some really good points. And I would love to see or somehow incorporate his comments and the other residents' comments into the draft well regs so we could all take a look at it and just take all the information in at one time in the right place, in the right category. Given that we are adding the section of maintenance and monitoring of existing wells into this that does not yet exist, because it seems that the language surrounding the new construction wells is a bit concerning for the folks with the pre-existing wells, as Dr. Wason has been pointing out. So we have to sort of take all that into consideration. And I just don't think we're yet prepared to do that. In addition, I reached out to Will Pickard, head of the AgCom, who is speaking with his group. He had an orchard meeting tonight, so he couldn't join us here. But he's speaking with his group to try and come up with a clarifying definition of an agricultural irrigation well that suits their needs and is also in line with what the DEP is requiring of them. So there's just a lot of moving parts here and a lot of people that should be involved. And I just want to make sure we do the right thing.
And if I may pile on to Mr. Baker's statements,
Of course.
I have also gotten several pieces of feedback besides Mr. Gerbig's email. I've also gotten feedback from a bunch of town people. A few of them are farmers, and I welcome also Kevin's continuance until we get the language from the AgCom as well, because they are very concerned about that. And as a side point, also, our farms have been hit hard by a weird classification in the town, taxable things like, you know, if you have a farm stand, all of a sudden your entire farm is now considered commercial. So, yeah, so whatever we can do to clarify the language and make it so that the wells are considered safe for that type of stuff too, whatever they're coming up from the AgCom, I would welcome that input as well. So, yeah.
So my intention would be to gather the information from both Mr. Gerbig and Chris Chobak, I believe is his last name. I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. To gather that information and sort of sit down with it and compile everything in different colors with a markup so we can really take a look at it in conjunction with what AgCom recommends.
Right.
So I'm going to motion to continue.
No need of motions of discussion, but
Great.
I really appreciate that Kevin's working on this, and thank you. I kind of resurrected this a few meetings ago, and then I didn't show up for a couple of weekends or weeks. So
Good on you.
perhaps what we can also do is as you guys kind of feel content with a package, a portion, perhaps we can start taking it in more bite-sized chunks, so we don't just open up the 25-page document every time and go. So kind of like, yeah, like if we feel like we have irrigation well understood, let's try, maybe try to tackle that first so we can section it off and feel more comfortable about it. And if that's possible, then we could maybe be more pointed pre-agenda time so that we can all really focus on, okay, this is what we're going to talk about, Matt. Don't talk about testing, Matt, because that's all we're talking about this week, Matt. So I greatly appreciate the work we're doing on this, and if that'll help, let's do it.
I really like that approach, because that means then we can basically, seal off a portion of the document saying, okay, we've reviewed that, that's good, and, move to the next section. And if we need to go back and review it, fine. But, at least we can seal off a portion and say, okay, everybody here is good with that. Let's move to the next section.
And one other thing, as you're looking at those, I had talked to Kevin Baker about this, is the offsets that are in your current well regulations have a little bit more protections than in the state proposed regulations, particularly the property line offset. And I kind of explained to Kevin why a lot of towns have that 50-foot offset to property lines. Not that you drill a lot of wells in town. We're starting to see more geothermal wells, so that may be something that we'll see more of wells, the type of wells.
And that we should make sure we have language in there that geothermal wells are absolutely not part of this, that you don't have to include them in any of these inspections, and they are not for potable drinking water or anything like that. So all that kind of good stuff, we don't worry about it, blah, 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 blah.
Well, there's a section in there that does call out geothermal wells. And Jim, I emailed you about this, just referring to the MA guidelines. And if we can just get, the standard template boilerplate language on how Massachusetts is going to define the geothermal well construction.
Right now, sorry about that. Yeah, right now, without any kind of section of the regulations, we use the DEP ground source heat pump guidance for siting geothermals.
So I 100% on that, but what I want to point out is that a colleague of mine put in a geothermal heat pump system for his house. He was in Stowe or Hudson or something like that. And the problem is that their language didn't exclude geothermal wells. And because it's a well, it has to follow the rules of all the wells that are there. So we need to make sure we have specific language in our well stuff so that we exclude geothermal wells from, the yearly maintenance testing and all the other stuff, because otherwise they get included in all of that because it is a well. Sorry.
I think we can certainly take that all into account. I agree with breaking the chunks. If we are happy with offsets, let's say, okay, we're happy with offsets, and that, we can, for all intents and purposes, lock down that paragraph. And thank you, Mr. Baker. Definitely agree that I would hate for us to work really hard on definitions and then have the ag come back before us and go, here's what we're finding, here's what we're thinking, and basically having to start from scratch. I have no problem starting from scratch if we need to, but I'd rather have all that information at once if we can, for the stakeholders and other regulatory bodies in one place at one time, so that we're not reinventing the wheel because, oh, I didn't realize that this happened, or a different board had this big piece. Let's look at pieces as we can at one time. I absolutely agree. So, yep. Pausing this discussion until we have the rest of the feedback and from the Agricultural Commission and our agricultural neighbors, make sure that we can both protect the public health as is our charge, but also do our best to meet their needs and their unique situation. So,
Yep.
All right,
Mr. Baker.
is the board comfortable with me sharing the model well regulations that we've already sort of drafted and tweaked a little bit with AgCom, or should I just send them the blank version? How would you folks like me to include them in this?
I obviously can't speak for the board, but I think personally, my perspective is that the model regs are obviously out there in public. I think our working documents, which are questions, suggestions, our offset changes, again, I think as long as we put them out there with the markups. So here's what the DEP model regs are. Here are some of the things we're looking at, either for changes, modifications, additions, deletions. I don't think I personally would not have a problem with that going out there, because the more eyes, the better. Again, there's 4 of us here tonight plus Jim.
Stakeholders, so, yeah.
You know, exactly. So I'd rather have them be out there and provide feedback, meaningful feedback. We're right back to the Zoom meetings and transparency. I would rather have it go out there and have everybody go pull out their red pens or their green pens and go, love this. This is great. Hey, have you thought about this? This definition doesn't match the definition you find in these 4 other different regulations under different agencies. Which one are you going with? Again, we can work really, really hard, but no matter how hard we work, somebody who does this every day or has their piece, the person with the well in the yard is going to look at this differently than the person without. The person who's running their farm is going to look at an irrigation well different than the person who's watering their lawn. That we, no matter how hard we work, are never going to necessarily understand the subtleties and the impacts. What seems like a reasonable provision, we may not realize the ripples that it creates. Doesn't mean we're not going to still make those ripples, but at least we need to be aware of what those results are. I personally am all in favor. Anybody else feel differently about sharing out to our stakeholders kind of where we are so far?
Oh, and we've shown it on screen during this meeting, so it's public.
Of course. So yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So-
So
Do it. Share it.
Okay.
And the more, we're not in an executive session. So as far as I'm concerned, every document that we have in here is public. So go do.
yeah, no, absolutely.
What do you think, Kevin? Does that
Yep.
work?
Mark it as a working document. Just make sure it's not going, no, these aren't the regs.
Yeah.
Make sure it's very, very clear. These are not the regs. This is a working document. This is model from the state. We're playing with it too. This is still
Maybe
not
have a
even
little
draft. This is not
watermark on
even
the-
draft version.
Maybe
It's not even a draft.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe have a little watermark on the back that says draft.
Yeah, it's not even a draft level yet, I don't think. But
No, it's not.
that'd be my only, make sure we're just very, very clear, because folks sometimes it gets out those ripples and it goes from here's our working model to this is what they're going to do next week. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We want to make sure this is not, we're not there yet. We're not even
Working
close. So,
papers. Working papers.
I've officially added a sample watermark to the back of the document.
Excellent.
thank you, Matt.
Good job, Matt. Gold
All
star.
right.
Smiley face.
Anything else for model well discussion? I do see we do have one person in the audience. He has not raised his hands. My guess is he was here for this. I'm hoping he's okay that we are not continuing this, but pausing our discussion until further information is gathered so we can all work from the same songbook here. His hand is not gone up
I do
yet,
want to say I do appreciate Mr. Gerbig's taking
absolutely
the time, energy,
Oh, yeah.
and his knowledge and everything he's bringing to the table here. I love that he is an invested citizen, and he's doing a great job.
Now he's
And
raising.
he's helping us. He's helping us. Yeah. So
Now he's raising his hand. One moment, sir.
I got his attention.
I'll promote you. You've been patient and been here for a long time, so.
Hey,
Good evening, sir.
how's it going? I figured
Evening.
since my name was getting thrown around, I might as well at least say Say hi. No, I'm good with extending it. I get it. You guys got a lot of stakeholders to look at here. And to the extent that you all have questions about the comments that I've put forward, and you've rightly identified they come from a particular perspective, let me know. I'm happy to help here.
I really appreciate it. And
like I
we'll
said,
start to organize the document and then bring it up so everybody can read it and they'll see your comments and other comments, and we'll, work as a team, and it takes a village, and we'll put it together and make it right for Littleton. So.
All right. Thank you all for your work. Thank you, Mr. Baker. Thank you, Mr. Gerby. We appreciate it. All right. If we're good, we can move on to our ID decision support tool update.
All right, so here's the update for the week. Again, ignore 2-week case counts. We don't get those anymore. Massachusetts is still working on a couple of these dashboards and improving the data access. So all I can really share is predominant agent has switched from EG5 to HV1. What does that mean to most of us? Absolutely nothing. The most important thing is still get your vaccination because it still helps. So boosters are out. They're available. You can get them any of the pharmacies around, doctor's office, whatnot. There was a study that came out that said slight increased risk of stroke, primarily in elderly patients or those at risk, if you do get your influenza shot and your COVID shot on the same exact day, which Kevin Davis did, and I did, before that report came out. Oh, you didn't? Oh, I thought you did. Sorry.
No, I tried. And
Well, lucky you. But they're all available. Go out and get them, please. Wastewater numbers are climbing. We were kind of sitting in the 300 400s, and now we've got some in the 800s. So it wouldn't surprise me if we also see some increased case counts outside of our own town. I'll show you another dashboard in a second. The arbovirus season is over as far as Massachusetts is concerned because they're no longer posting data. So I am going to officially close that. We made it through that season. Okay. Influenza at Massachusetts level is currently in the low category. But RSV is looking really exciting. So here's last season's RSV peak. And here we are this season. So we are on that wonderful skyrocketing ramp of the RSV season. So gone are the days of that little low hump back here, back when like people had to like wear masks and stuff. Just saying. So RSV's out there. So please, if you do develop any flu-like symptoms, any sort of respiratory symptoms, please make sure you're taking care of yourself. Consider wearing masks around others because RSV is contagious, highly contagious. So take care of yourself. Try to protect others around you. That's where we're at. And let me flip over to show this. Maybe. There's so many things. So this is a relatively updated dashboard on Mass Department of Health is putting out. So it's got some nice stuff. It has kind of, this is just respiratory disease, which I like the fact that, I mean, it's a big bucket and there are lots of contributors to it. So I think visibility into that is nice. They give kind of some rankings of influenza severity, COVID-19 ED visits, and COVID-19 hospital admissions. I'm not as wild about those two metrics because I don't think they were ever that great. Because I think it's been a long time since COVID-19 ED visits were a real thing that was impactful. Dan may have some other information about that, but it's something. On the right side is some vaccination information. This is for the whole state, so we don't have Littleton-based data because, as I said, that vaccination dashboard is still a work in progress for them. But it's a bit paltry numbers, so let's try to get those up. And then they've got some little sections here on respiratory illnesses just kind of globally. And these are all just whether they're RSV or influenza or COVID-19 or these three little lines down here. So COVID-19 is actually the high one, but it looks like it's dipping. But this one is the one that is more concerning to me just because we rode a COVID wave at the beginning of September when school started.
School.
And then it kind of dipped down a bit, and now it's going back up on a trajectory into the winter. So COVID-19 is still out there. People are still getting illnesses from it. I like the fact that kind of deaths are down, but current deaths numbers are not accurate because there's a delay in that reporting. So don't look at this drop and feel great about it. It's probably just going to come back and hover around this line that's happening.
It's a 4-week, and it's also a 4-week lag between uptick and seeing an increase in death.
Yeah. So this goes up. This is going to have another peak that looks like this after that blue peak, probably.
Yep.
They have an influenza section, and there we are in this like kind of dark blue area, just at least something a little more focused. I didn't make the colors. Dark blue is actually the lowest risk, and light blue is higher than that. So this shows us as minimal. But I haven't dug into this enough this is called influenza-like illness activity. So again, it's just all these respiratory illnesses that might be bouncing around your community. And then here's the wastewater surveillance. So I get my data from a different source than this particular graph. It probably adds it in, but you can see that they're showing the same kind of thing. It was kind of hovering around these kind of lower numbers, and now there is a big jump in that. So that could be a sign of more things to come. And then, as I said, immunizations not available yet. So I just wanted to show that this is out there. It's kind of newer. I like the fact that there's something. I'll still try to get more specific data for our community, but it's a struggle right now. And that's what I got.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Any questions for Matt from the board that you didn't already ask? All right. Nothing. No, thank you so much for, as always, sharing the information. It's still out there. And yeah, that viral dashboard is, the respiratory dashboard is really certainly interesting. I hadn't seen that yet. So that's really cool.
The new Tableau dashboard.
We love new data. It's all about the data. All right. Any administrative matters? I do not believe we have any minutes for tonight to approve. And Brenda is unfortunately not here tonight. She is ill, so we wish her a speedy recovery, and we'll catch up on our outstandings. Does anybody have any correspondence or member updates or discussion? Kevin Davis is saying no. Kevin Baker has his hand up. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to check in on the health director position and see where that was currently.
We are currently in
candidates.
Yeah, and Matt, jump in. So we have a number of candidates that have been paperwork reviewed by Matt and myself and HR. We are working on dates to do a first round interview with candidates, HR, the interim building commissioner as kind of one of their peers in that department, and Matt and or myself. So hopefully we'll be able to do that next week with that first round. Thin the candidate pool out a little bit for interviews with the board and town administrator. And I'm not sure who else on that. Again, I have to go back and double check my list. But Matt, does that sound about where we are?
Yeah,
we got some
five candidates penciled in for first interviews right now. And scheduling that is, I was talking to Michelle yesterday about that. So that's happening right now.
Thank you.
And from a process, sorry, go ahead.
Nope. Oh, yes, sir.
So from a process perspective, following up on what Kevin was talking about, we would interview those people in executive session, I assume, if we did it as a board.
No. So
okay,
we're open to suggestion. The common process is that a board designee or two, in this case Dan and I, do some initial interviews with a small group, a second round of interviews with more people, including like town administrator and more departments that we interface with. And then frankly, I think there's this expectation that group makes a real decision and throws one candidate to this board to then basically approve. I'm not convinced that this will go that way. So I threw that out to Michelle to say, I think that this board may need to have its own interview, but I assume that would be at a public meeting.
Okay.
Because I would have to go back and look at the executive session requirements. I don't think an interview meets the executive because it's in a public interview. I don't think executive session usually revolves around contract negotiation, places where open discussion would place the town at risk as far as litigation or contracting, those pieces. Or usually it's personnel matters, but usually around disciplinary or those kind of pieces rather than hiring process. If there was a discussion, so for example, that this is not I don't believe this would be a contract position, this would be an employee type position, but the interviews for a fire chief or a police chief, when it gets to that level, are public. Once that decision is made, then the contract negotiation between them regarding money, benefits, those things, those are executive session as part of the negotiation. And then, of course, once it's completed, the contract becomes public. But the negotiation piece is executive session. Interview should not be, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe meets the state requirement for executive session.
I
All
mean,
right,
if,
no,
if
thank
it
you.
makes sense to I think it's incredibly important for the same two people to be involved in, say, all of the first interviews to build that pool in your head. But honestly, if it makes sense to swap somebody out, if somebody else, Kevin or Kevin, was incredibly interested in being in on those interviews, perhaps it would make sense for me to do the first round and you to do all of the second round ones. I'd be happy to kind of do that kind of flex, just so we all feel more comfortable with it.
This is
And
more.
different sets of eyes and different sets of questions and different experiences.
It was just a question. I didn't know where we were going with it. That's all.
All right,
Well,
no, Mr.
We'll
Baker,
keep you
thank you
posted
for
as it
reminding
gets
us.
closer to that, and if you're interested, say something.
Yeah, I mean, get the first round of interviews done, and if there's someone you feel like needs a second, let us know, and we'll, if you want us to do it instead of you guys, whatever, it's up, whatever makes it the best for the board and Littleton. It's up. We'll get there when we get there.
No, we have a number of candidates who appear highly qualified from their resumes and CVs. So we'll see how things move forward as we meet them in person. But we were lucky that on paper, the way the candidate pool has been intriguing.
Excellent.
All right. Any other correspondence, questions, updates for the board or the public? All right. I don't see anything. I see nothing from Matt, nothing from Kevin Baker, nothing from Kevin Davis. Jim, anything exciting to share from the show that we've missed, or anything you see coming up that we should be aware of or be ready for?
Not at this point here. I'm happy to be engaged with whatever you want with that well rigs. So
Thank you very much.
Yep.
No, you've been great. All right. If no one has any other discussion points for the good of the board,
Motion
Gino's
to
not
adjourn.
here, so we'll have to see somebody else. Okay. I have a motion to adjourn
Second.
and a second roll call vote. Kevin Baker,
Kevin Baker votes yes.
Kevin Davis.
Kevin Davis votes yes.
Thank you, sir. Matt Wason.
Matt Wason, yes.
And the chair votes yes. The November 29, 2023 Littleton Board of Health meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your help and support tonight.